I dare you to info dump. Yep, I said it. I know there are so many people out there in this whole author sphere, and they're always eager to say, don't info dump. It's a really easy thing to say and to slap authors' hands over and make them feel like, wow, I can't talk about my story at all. I really think that the large chunks of information about your world building get a really bad rap, especially when you're writing science fiction and fantasy books. People are there for the world building. It's what makes science fiction and fantasy awesome, because you have all of the cool, fun, amazing details that you made up that make your story fantastic, that make it exciting, and of course your readers are there for it. So instead of just saying don't info dump and then leaving you there wondering, well then what do I do with this world building that literally gives context and clarity and all kinds of fun shinies to the story world, I'm actually going to share with you some of my top tips for how to include those large chunks of description and world building information in your book in a way that readers are actually eager to read, where they're actually looking forward to that and they're saying, hey, where's my info dump already? Will they use those exact words? No, they won't, but they're still going to want all of that context. And of course, we're here to give it to them in a way that is going to be aligned with good craft and good writing techniques. So excited to share this with you today on this episode of Author Culture, which is a fantastic world building culture edition. This is Janeen Ippolito. Let's chat. Hey there, welcome back to Author Culture, where we're all about celebrating science fiction and fantasy, both the stories and the fantastic authors who create them. So whether you are a science fiction and fantasy author who is here for all the awesome tips, tricks, and encouragement to achieve your sustainable success in a way that makes sense for you, or you are an excited reader who loves these genres and wants to peek behind the curtain to see what it's all about to create them, and of course stick around for my fantastic bookish shares and thoughts on different fandom movies and other media. Either way, you're in the right place. I'm super glad you're here. We're going to have a great time talking shop, sparking ideas, and celebrating all these fantastic genre roles that we love. And if you haven't already, do make sure that you've hit that subscribe button and the notification bell on YouTube, or that you've also subscribed on the Author Culture Substack, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you listen to this show. And if you want sneak peeks of my newest resources for authors, including new courses, toolkits, and books, do make sure that you sign up for a paid subscription for Author Culture for just $5 a month. And my undying gratitude, you help support Author Culture staying out here and online, and plus you do get exclusive sneak peeks of what I'm working on next to help authors just like you. Now, let's talk about this whole thing called info dumping. Of course, you know me, I love doing definitions. Defining the terms helps us all be on the same page when we're discussing a particular item or area or etc. Now, according to Writer's Digest, in reference to info dumping, this term is specifically referencing when a writer puts a ton of often unnecessary information in one big clump, detracting from the main action of the story. It'll make your book feel like a textbook instead of a story, and it usually causes readers to start disengaging. So again, when we're talking about the info dump, we're talking about the giant clump of text. And when I Googled this, everyone is ready to give their own feedback on what an info dump is and why you should avoid it, and it's a terrible thing. And, show, don't tell, and all of those things. And what this can teach writers starting out, especially in science fiction and fantasy, is avoid the giant clump of text. Do not let yourself have paragraphs and paragraphs of explanation. Don't do it. It's bad. But here's the thing. Then you read all of these science fiction and fantasy books, and they totally have sections where there are 3 or 4 paragraphs of lots of world building information just put in there right away. Can't stop them. And these are books that have made a lot of money, and these books are more recent. And is it like only if you're an author who makes lots and lots of sales on your books then you're allowed to info dump? Where is the disconnect here? I just finished a book in a really popular urban fantasy series, and there is a ton of what we would call info dumping in that. We're talking paragraph after paragraph, all these explanations, and you can't avoid the fact that in science fiction and fantasy stories, readers are partly there for the world building. Unless they're looking for wallpaper, unless they want a little bit of flavoring to their story, regular science fiction and fantasy that's not meant to be a quick read is gonna have the world building. And you want that stuff, and it's interesting. This is why you need confidence in your genre, and this is why you need helpful feedback from people who read books in your genre. Because what info dumping looks like varies greatly by genre, by style. What's going to be too much description in a thriller book is going to be too little description for some kind of epic length book. It just looks different. This is where, again, I'm saying do your homework and know your genre. Know what books are like in your genre. And of course, when you're choosing an editor, make sure that they understand your genre too, so they don't try to correct you out of something that is perfectly acceptable for your readers. Now, that being said, my trick for info dumping, besides the fact that it is helpful to master your craft and insert that information in drips and drabs throughout your story, that is completely legit and definitely something that you need to work at as you're growing as an author. One of my top tips for using info dumping or those large chunks of text in a story is setting the stage that your readers want the information. They want an info dump. And in fact, when I'm working with clients, sometimes I'll go through and go, where's your world building? And they'll go, oh, I was taught not to info dump. And I'm like, yeah, but you've earned my attention now. I need to know what's going on here. It's important when you are writing science fiction and fantasy that you are using your world building mindfully and all that information mindfully to signal to the reader that they are in the right place. They're in the right book. They're in the right genre, and you understand what they're looking for. You're here to give it to them because you purposely wrote in that genre, because you love it. It's fantastic. We're going to have a great time together. So my perspective on this is less of no info dumping, aka no giant large paragraphs, because we can open books and see giant large paragraphs everywhere, and these books are selling lots and lots and lots of copies. But it's know your genre, know what the expectations are for that particular genre style of communication, and then earn your info dumps, earn your explanation, earn your exposition. My personal alliterative favorite phrase is earning your explanation. Earn the explanation. Make your readers so interested in your story world and so interested in your characters through what you're putting on the page from the very first paragraph that they're like, I'm interested, I'm here for it, this is cool, get me the story world. Give me the paragraphs, you've earned my attention, you've earned my explanation, now it's time to deliver. And you want to set up that tension from the very first page and start doing bits and pieces of that world building, dribs and drabs from your first page, because readers' attention spans are getting a bit slower. Now, it depends on your reader, it depends on their personality, it depends on a lot of things. But in general, technology is not really helping us to keep our attention spans longer. And so at the very least, you're having to fight that, and your readers are having to fight that in order to keep their attention on the page when everything else is demanding their time. So if you're writing dystopian, from the very first page, we need to set up something that alludes to that dystopian element. You need to start setting the stage for that dystopian element. You need to start teasing out how there's some kind of corrupt government or governing authority that is trying to solve a problem in the worst possible way. And that needs to be set up in some kind of haunting, interesting way from the beginning. And in fact, dystopians can sometimes get away with prologues that set up how bad the world is. I know we're not supposed to do prologues that do exposition, but guess what? Dystopian readers are partly there for how bad the government is and what kind of statements you're making about governing power and all of that. So that's where it comes to knowing your genre. Conversely, if you're doing a fairy tale, you need to understand what people are expecting from that fairy tale and start promising it to them from the get-go, using your dialogue, your setting, your action and your story, that plot, and then of course, adding in that world building right from the get-go. This is not something that you need to reserve for later on. You add it right in little bits and pieces, earn the attention, earn the explanation, and then give them that awesome explanation. And of course, for my awesome people doing mashups, because I see you out there and you're going, that's great, Janeen, but what if I'm mashing up two genres? Which one do I start with? How do I start teasing in that world building? You need to think about which genre is your dominant genre, which one is basically featuring more on your book cover. That's going to help you figure out how you're going to tease readership in. Because even if you have what you think is a 50-50 mashup, I found that 99% of the time, one still dominates more than the other, and you want to make sure that you're setting that up first. I have a fairy tale book with dystopian elements met by midnight. And so at the beginning of it, right from the first page, I'm setting up for my Cinderella character, I'm setting up that her father is dying, because we know in Cinderella, she gets an evil stepmother, evil stepsisters, or in my case, the evil stepmother character is actually that sort of bad governing authority, which makes it dystopian. But the first thing I'm doing is setting up her father is dying in a very poetic way, and that's bringing in that fairy tale element, that lyrical element. It's speaking to that expectation. And then as I keep going now, immediately inserting the fact that instead of having a cruel hovering stepmother, I have a cruel hovering governing authority that is ruining her life and forcing her to heal people to the point of her own exhaustion, because again, solving a problem people need healed in a really bad way. We're going to lock up the healers and force them to drain themselves dry. So when you're thinking about doing these kind of mashups, you have to figure out what is the first thing that you are promising in that mashup. What is the dominant mashup there? What is the thing that the people are there for first? It can be a little fiddly. It can vary book by book, but that's what you're going to be figuring out when you're trying to tease things in, so that again, you can get those lovely longer paragraphs that can be really helpful in storytelling, but you have to earn them. And again, understand your genre and how readers expect to be communicated with. So when we're talking about opening your book, we're going to set that stage. We're going to ground the reader from the get-go into your story, into what they can expect, into the adventure you're taking them on, right from those pages. Earn their attention, make it really compelling and really interesting, and then earn the explanation and earn them saying, hey, can you tell me more about this world? Hey, what's going on here? Hey, I need to know more about this. And then when you do that, you actually do have an excuse to do those long paragraphs. Now, that being said, as you can, I recommend, even when you're doing those longer paragraphs, break them up into shorter chunks. It's just easier to read and scan on a page, but that varies according to your genre. Again, I know epic length books can have different genre expectations and rules. If you're an author who is very much building a following based on your particular writing style and quirks, and it's working for you and you're finding success, stick with that. Stick with what your readers are used to from you and connect with them on that level. But overall, set the stage, let your readers know what's happening in the moment, connect them with what is immediately going on in that moment that's relevant to your genre. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be an actiony scene. You don't have to open with fisticuffs, but it has to be some kind of movement scene that is moving the plot forward in some way. Get their attention, then you can sprinkle in more of the world building. Set the stage, ground the reader in your story world, get them interested, earn the explanation. And a quick bonus tip, when you're including that information in your story, there are ways that you can do that in a more interesting, dynamic fashion. This is for those of you especially who like writing first-person POV or who can write a really compelling, deep third POV. You can flavor up that description, those description chunks, with some commentary from your main character. And so when you're looking at a way to make that chunk of your earned explanation, that chunk of information more interesting, don't forget to add flavorful commentary from how your POV character is thinking about the scene. One person might describe a spaceship as a gleaming vessel upon the stars. Another person might describe it as a giant half-crushed tin can that someone put too much lacquer on. And you're like, well, those sound like two different ships. Not necessarily. It can all depend on the perspective of your narrator, of your POV character. And of course, since you want to give the reader an accurate explanation, you're going to have to make sure that you clarify when your narrator is reliable or unreliable. But the point is, you can always flavor up that explanation with some colloquialisms, with some specific ways that your protagonist, your POV character, what they think about these various bits of information, how they see it. And that can be a great way to make some of those world building elements do some double duty as characterization and as connection with the reader. They don't have to just be generic chunks of text. They can be something interesting. They can be written different ways depending on who is describing it and the relationship to it. If we have a fae court, it's going to be described differently by a high lord of that court who is rocking it and absolutely loves what's going on versus a servant in that court who was stuck there through some kind of binding oath and can't get out of it. They're going to have two completely different ways that they look at that information and that they communicate that information. And this can be really excellent for a first-person POV story, but it can also be really excellent if you have a deep third POV. There's even some subtle ways that you can play around with it from an objective third-person POV. So just consider that, a little more craft, a little bit more technique, but it really does make those world-building explanation moments even more interesting and gets them to do double duty for your story. And if you'd like me to look at your pages personally and give you some thoughts on whether your opening chapter is really connecting with readers and earning their attention and earning that explanation, or if it is wavering between too much at once or not really having a lot of connection, do make sure that you hop over to my website. I do offer specific book coaching that looks at the first 20 pages of your manuscript and then gives you all kinds of customized tools and strategies and feedback. But just be advised, my schedule does fill up fast. So a quick recap: when you're writing those first pages of your book, or even starting some kind of action scene or movement scene in your book, set the stage immediately to meet those reader expectations, to connect them with what's going on in the scene, ground them in the moment, just trickle in those world building elements on an as needed basis, capture that interest, and then you can do your explanation. Earn your descriptions, earn your explanation, so your readers will stick around. And make sure when you're including those world building elements, whether you're earning the explanation, make sure, if at all possible, you are adding some of that characterization flavor. Don't miss the chance to use character voice and use POV to your advantage. What do you think? Agree? Disagree? Have some other fun tips about how to incorporate world building into stories? Toss all of that in a comment below this video on YouTube or on the Author Culture Substack or on social media, and I would love to hang out and chat with you more. And remember, your existence is fantastic. Now go forth and be awesome.